Hello, friends. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Henry and the alien women. The story is very enjoyable, so stay with us until the end. Enjoy watching. My spaceship broke down, and I accidentally crashed on a planet inhabited by alien vampire women. The distress lights failed one by one, and Henry watched them go like a man counting his own excuses. First the port beacon, then the hull integrity strip, then the little amber panel that had cheerfully promised him, for 11 years, that everything was fine. It was not fine. The ship screamed through a violet sky the color of a bruise nobody wanted to talk about, and Henry gripped the yoke and said, with the calm of a man who has run out of better options, Okay, we've been through worse. They had not been through worse. He said it anyway, because the ship, a battered freighter he had named Gus for reasons lost to a long night and cheaper fuel, deserved to hear a lie before the end. The forest came up fast and black. There was a sound like the sky being unzipped, a violence of branches, a smell of ozone and hot metal, and then a silence so complete it felt rehearsed. Henry hung upside down in his harness, blinking at a cracked viewport, and took a slow inventory of himself. 2 arms, 2 legs, one profound sense of being owed an apology by the universe. "Gus," he said. "Buddy, if you can hear me, blink twice." Gus did not blink. Gus was, in the technical language of the trade, extremely off. He clawed his way out through a rupture in the hull, dropping into loam that was soft and cold and faintly luminous, glowing where his boots crushed it as though the ground itself were keeping notes. The air was thin and sweet. 2 moons sat low over the tree line, one pale, one the reddish color of an old scar. No chart he had ever loaded named this place. No chart named anything out here. This was the kind of dark the maps politely left blank and hoped you were smart enough to avoid. Henry, historically, had not been smart enough to avoid much. That was when he felt it. The specific ancient sensation of being watched. He turned, one hand pressed to his ribs, and saw them between the trees. Women. Pale as moonlight on bone, their skin luminous with its own faint white light, standing so still they might have been carved and left there by something that no longer visited. Their eyes caught the moon's and threw the light back gold. They did not move. They did not breathe, as far as he could tell. And Henry found himself acutely aware that he was breathing quite a lot, in loud, undignified gulps, like a man who wanted everyone present to know he was alive and would prefer to stay that way. "Hi," he said. It came out as a squeak. He cleared his throat and tried again, aiming for the voice of a reasonable galactic citizen. "Hi, so, my ship broke down, which, I know how that sounds. Everyone says that, but mine really did." He gestured at the smoking crater behind him. "That's not usually there." None of them answered. One of them tilted her head, and he saw that her ears were long, tapering to a delicate point well past where an ear had any business ending, and the strangeness of it went straight through him and lodged somewhere behind his heart. Then the ranks parted, and she came through. She was taller than the others, and she moved as though hurry were a thing that happened to lesser creatures. She stopped a few steps away, close enough that the cold came off her skin in a slow tide, close enough that he could see she was studying him. Not hungrily, exactly, but the way a person studies a puzzle they have wanted for a very long time and had begun to believe would never arrive. "You should be afraid," she said softly. Henry was. Every animal instinct he owned was filing paperwork to leave, and yet he could not look away from her, from the gold of her eyes and the terrible patience in them, and, strangest of all, she did not seem able to look away from him either. "Working on it," he managed. "Give me a second." Henry woke to a ceiling he did not recognize, which was becoming a theme. He was lying on something that was almost a bed, in a hall so vast the far end vanished into shadow, and the whole place was lit by a cold blue radiance that came from no lamp he could find. It seeped from veins in the stone walls, pulsing faintly, like the building had a heartbeat and had decided not to hide it. He lay still for a moment and let his ribs remind him, one by one, of everything that had gone wrong. "Alive," he informed the ceiling. "Noted." under protest. He sat up. His jacket was gone. His boots were arranged neatly by the wall as though someone had tidied up after nearly eating him. And across the hall, seated on a throne carved from the same glowing stone, was the tall one. Nova. He didn't know her name yet, but he already thought of her as the one, the way you think of the largest wave before it reaches you. She was watching him. Of course she was watching him. He had the distinct impression she had been watching him for hours, with the patience of a geologist waiting on a mountain. "So," Henry said, because silence was worse, "I'm going to guess this isn't a hospital." "You are the first warm thing to fall from the sky in 100 years, she said. Her voice moved through the hall like water under ice. "My people have not tasted a living heart in longer than your entire kind has kept its histories." "Right." Henry nodded slowly. "So, hospital adjacent. A hospital where I'm the medicine." Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. The distant ancestor of one. Around the edges of the hall, the others waited, pale, still, gold-eyed, their long ears catching the blue light. He could feel their hunger like a temperature. It would have been easy to panic, and he was, in a sustained and dignified internal way. But Henry had learned long ago that the mouth kept moving even when the man behind it had left the building. "Can I just say," he offered, "the ambiance in here is incredible. This lighting? Chef's kiss. Genuinely. Do you do this yourselves, or is it more of a natural rock situation?" He rapped the wall with a knuckle. "Because back home we pay a fortune for mood lighting and it never looks half this good. It's all flickering strips and a guy named Owen who says he'll fix it Tuesday. It is never fixed Tuesday." Nova stared at him. "You are babbling." "I babble when I'm being appraised as a snack. It's a whole reflex. My therapist had opinions." "A snack," she repeated, and the word seemed to genuinely puzzle her, turning it over. "You reduce yourself to nourishment." "I'm nothing if not self-aware." She rose from the throne, and the room stilled the way a forest stills before weather. She crossed to him unhurried, and the cold came with her, and she looked down at him with those impossible gold eyes, and Henry understood with total clarity that his life was a coin balanced on its edge, and she was deciding which way it fell. "They want me to give you to them," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "It would be simplest, sensible. I have been sensible for a very long time." "I'd like to lodge a complaint against sensible," Henry said. "Historically, it's been overrated. Some of my best decisions were deeply unsensible. Naming my ship Gus, for instance. Terrible idea, loved it." For a long moment she said nothing, only studied him, and he had the dizzying sense that whatever centuries-old puzzle sat behind her eyes, he had just landed on it like a fly on a chessboard and moved a piece by accident. "You will stay," she said at last, "until I understand you." "That could take a while," Henry admitted. "Smarter people have given up." "I have time," said Nova. "And you, I think, do not." And she turned and left him breathing in the blue-lit dark, unsure whether he had just been spared or merely postponed. They gave Henry the run of the city, which he understood was less a kindness than a longer leash. He wandered its pale terraces under the twin moons, past towers grown rather than built, spiraling up out of the luminous stone like something Coral had dreamed. The inhabitants watched him pass with unhurried gold eyes. Nobody ate him. He counted this, each morning, as a personal victory. Nova walked with him more often than her people liked. He could tell they didn't like it by the way they went very still whenever she appeared at his side, the specific stillness of a room full of relatives who have opinions and the good manners not to voice them. "Your city's dying," Henry said one evening because he'd noticed the empty terraces, the silent towers, the way the population felt like an echo of something larger. "No offense. It's a beautiful death. Very tasteful. Our star died first," Nova said. She looked up, though the sky here showed only the 2 moons and a scatter of unfamiliar constellations. "Long ago, we left it. We have crossed dark between the worlds looking for another that suited us, and we have never quite stopped looking." She paused. "The hunger came with the crossing," Our old science suppressed it, buried it, but it was never cured, only postponed. We are a very patient people, mostly because we have run out of other options. I know that feeling, Henry said. That's basically my entire financial situation. She tilted her head at him, and her long ear caught the moonlight, and he lost the thread of what he'd been saying for a moment, which was happening to him with alarming frequency. To fill the silence, he tried to explain the concept of a snack, a thing you ate not from need but from mild, idle wanting, between the meals that actually mattered. Nova was appalled, genuinely, morally appalled, in a way he found unreasonably delightful. You consume, she said, when you are not hungry. Constantly. It's one of humanity's great achievements. We invented an entire food that's mostly air and regret, and we eat it while watching other people pretend to fall in love. That is monstrous. That's cheese puffs. And yes. She was quiet a while, and then, as though offering a fair trade of horrors, she told him that her people could hear a living heartbeat from across a valley, that his, right now, was the loudest thing on the planet to her, that she had been listening to it since he fell out of the sky and had found to her own irritation that she did not want it to stop. Henry's heartbeat, informed of this, promptly did something athletic and embarrassing. See, that's much worse than cheese puffs, he said. You win. You've out-monstered me. I concede the monster trophy. There is no trophy. There should be. I'd have made you one. I'm surprisingly good with my hands. Ask Gus. He winced. Don't ask Gus. Gus is currently a hole in the ground. Something shifted in her face then, something he was learning to read. She looked at him the way a person looks at a window after years in a room with none. You make me curious, she said, and she said it like an accusation, like a symptom, like a thing that frightened her. I have not been curious in longer than I can easily count. I had decided curiosity was a thing that belonged to the young and the short-lived, and then a very loud man fell into my forest and began complaining about the lighting. In fairness, the lighting is now excellent. I stand by the review. You are the most frightening thing that has happened to me in a century, Nova said softly. And you have teeth like a child's. Henry considered this. The stone glowed. Somewhere a night bird that was not quite a bird made a sound like a struck wire, and the two moons hung over them, one pale, one scarred, and he realized that the most terrifying thing in the world was not that she might one day decide to bite him. It was that he was starting to hope she'd keep talking forever, and he had absolutely no idea what a man was supposed to do with a hope like that. Not everyone in the Pale City found Henry as charming as the Queen apparently did. He learned this from Victoria, who cornered him on a high terrace one morning with the specific energy of a woman who had drawn a short straw and intended to make it everyone's problem. She keeps you, Victoria said, gold eyes narrowed, long ears flat with disdain. Like a jewel in a drawer. One warm heart in 100 years and she hoards it. The rest of us starve on principle while she plays with her food. To be fair, Henry said, I'm terrible food, stringy, anxious. My blood is 90% caffeine and unpaid invoices. You'd be disappointed. She did not laugh. Victoria, he suspected, had not laughed since the star died. She swept away in a whisper of cold, and Henry filed her under problems for later, a folder that was, frankly, getting overstuffed. He went to the crater instead, as he did most days, to sit with the corpse of Gus and feel sorry for both of them. But today, poking through the wreckage with a length of glowing stone for a pry bar, he found something that made his heart do the athletic, embarrassing thing again, this time for a better reason. The core was cracked, but it was warm. Warm meant containment. Warm meant the reactor hadn't voided itself into the loam. Warm meant, with enough time and enough stubbornness and a truly heroic amount of luck, that Gus might one day fly. You beautiful idiot, Henry breathed, pressing his hand to the ship's scorched flank. You're not dead. You're just resting. Like in the Nevermind. You wouldn't get the reference. You're a ship. Which was when the second thought arrived, uninvited and unwelcome, and sat down heavily in his chest. Flying meant leaving. He had spent his first days here calculating escape. Now the possibility of it made his stomach do something complicated, and he stood in the crater holding a wrench improvised from a vampire kingdom's cutlery and had absolutely no idea what he wanted. The repair, at least, gave his hands something to do while his brain fell apart. The trouble was that nothing here was built for human tools or human machines. He needed conductive filament and had cold stone. He needed a torque coupling and had, generously, rocks. He spent an entire afternoon trying to seal a coolant line with a substance the locals used for embalming, discovered it worked alarmingly well, and decided not to examine his feelings about that. "What you making?" said a voice, and he nearly put the pry bar through the reactor. Nova stood at the lip of the crater. She had come without sound, as she always did, which he had asked her repeatedly not to do, and which she continued to do because he was fairly sure she enjoyed watching him levitate in fright. "A terrible decision," Henry said, before he could stop himself. She came down into the wreckage, unhurried, and crouched beside him. There was grease on his hands and, he was informed later, a streak of it across his face. She looked at the cracked, warm core, and she understood immediately what it meant. He watched the understanding move behind her eyes, and for a long moment, neither of them said the obvious thing. "It flies," she said quietly. Not a question. "It could. Might. If I don't blow us both up first." He wiped his hands on his trousers, which accomplished nothing. Which, statistically, is on the table. Nova was silent. She reached out and touched the ship's flank the way he had, curious, and her cold fingers came away sooty, and she looked at the black smudge on her pale skin with an expression he couldn't name. "You could leave," she said. "I could," Henry agreed. The moment stretched, quiet and dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with teeth. The crater glowed faintly around them. Somewhere above, Victoria was surely sharpening a grievance, and Henry, holding a wrench that used to be a spoon, looked at the smudge of his ruined ship on the Queen's immortal hand and found that he could not, for the life of him, say the next part out loud. Neither, he noticed, could she. Victoria did not sharpen her grievance in private. She sharpened it in the great hall, in front of the whole silent court, and she chose her moment with the cruelty of someone who had waited a century for a grievance worth having. "I invoke the old right," she said, and the words moved through the assembled pale figures like a cold current. "The claim is contested. If the Queen will not share the warm one with her people, then the Queen will answer for keeping him. Blood decides. It always has." Henry, standing at the edge of the dais where he'd been trying to be inconspicuous, leaned toward Nova. "That sounds bad. Is that bad? Your face is doing a thing." "It is the old law," Nova said quietly. "A challenge I cannot refuse without appearing weak, and a queen who appears weak among my people does not remain a queen for long, or alive. So, bad then. Great. Cool. Love it here." The court withdrew to prepare, which bought them a few hours, and the two of them spent those hours in the blue-lit dark of the hall, forced into the kind of fast, total trust that usually took people years and a shared lease. She told him what Victoria could do, the speed, the strength, the way the old ones fought. He told her what he could contribute, which was, by his own honest accounting, moral support and possibly a distraction if I scream at the right time. "You are not a warrior," Nova said. "Not unkindly. I am aggressively not a warrior. I once lost a fight to a cargo door. It wasn't even locked." But the humor was thinner now, worn down to something gentler underneath, the way a joke gets when two people are using it to hold hands without admitting it. And in the quiet between the jokes, the guardedness they'd both been carrying finally cracked. 100 years, Nova said, not looking at him, looking instead at the pulsing veins of light in the walls. "That is how long I have been careful. How long I have felt nothing but the hunger and the duty and the long dark between stars. I told myself that was enough, that an immortal learns to want nothing, because everything she wants, she outlives." She turned her gold eyes on him. "And then you fell into my forest and complained about the lighting, and I have not stopped wanting since. It is intolerable. I would like to file a complaint. There's a lot of that going around, Henry said. His voice wasn't quite steady. For what it's worth, I stopped wanting to leave. Somewhere around the snack conversation. I've been sitting on a working escape route for days, and I keep finding reasons to fix things that aren't broken. I recalibrated a coolant line yesterday that was fine. It was completely fine. I just wanted an excuse to stay in the crater a little longer, near your terrible, wonderful, impossible city. Nova looked at him for a long time, and something in her ancient, careful face came unfastened. "You are a fool," she said softly, consistently. "It's my one reliable trait." The bells that were not bells rang then, a resonance that came up through the stone and into the teeth, and the court reassembled, and Victoria stood waiting at the center of the hall, gold-eyed and beautiful and eager, flanked by those who thought as she did. There were more of them than Henry had hoped. There were, he counted grimly, quite a lot of them. He and Nova stepped forward together into the ring of cold, pale faces, and the trap closed around them, and for a moment it looked very much like the end of a short and recently interesting life. And then Nova did something that stunned her own people into absolute silence. She stepped in front of Henry, not behind him, to guard her possession. In front of him, between the fragile, warm human and everything that wanted him, her arms loose, her chin high, placing her immortal body between the court and the mortal as though he were the thing worth protecting. The hall went utterly still. Even Victoria hesitated. A queen did not shield her food. Henry, heart hammering loud enough for the whole valley to hear, understood that she had just changed the rules of a game older than his species, and that there was no rule after this one, only whatever the two of them made next. The silence broke, and Victoria came like weather. She moved faster than anything Henry had ever seen, a blur of pale fury, and Nova met her in the center of the hall with a sound like two glaciers deciding to disagree. They struck and parted and struck again, too quick for his mortal eyes to follow properly. He caught only flashes, the arc of a movement, the aftermath of a blow that cracked the glowing stone floor and sent light bleeding out of the wound in the rock. "Okay," Henry said, to no one, backing toward the wall. "Okay, moral support. I can do moral support. Go Nova. Boo Victoria. Very rude woman. 0 stars." It was not, he was aware, tipping the scales. Nova was strong, but Victoria had spent a century marinating in resentment, which turned out to be excellent fuel. She drove the queen back, and the court watched in that terrible pale stillness, waiting to see which way the old law would fall, and Henry understood with cold clarity that Nova was fighting for 2 lives and Victoria only had to win once. He needed to do something human and improbable. It was, historically, the only kind of thing he was good at. His eyes landed on the veins of light in the walls, the cold blue radiance that lit the whole city, pulsing, alive, running through the stone like current through wire. Because it was current. He'd spent days elbow-deep in Gus's guts. He knew the look of a power conduit, even when it was pretending to be architecture. The whole city was one vast circuit, and he'd been carrying a piece of a starship's ruptured core in his jacket for 3 days like a lucky rock. "Nova!" he shouted. "The floor! Get her onto the bright seam, the big vein, center of the room, and then don't be touching it." "What?" Nova called back, mid-catastrophe. "Trust the fool." She did. That was the part that undid him a little, later, that in the middle of a fight for her life she heard him and simply believed him, wrenching Victoria around by momentum until the challenger's feet came down hard on the brightest seam of light in the floor. Henry jammed the cracked core fragment into the wall vein and did the single most reckless thing in a life densely populated by reckless things. He completed the circuit. The city's own power, 100 years of patient current, dumped itself through the seam. Light went white. There was a sound like the sky being unzipped, the same sound Gus had made falling, and Victoria was thrown the length of the hall to land in a smoking, deeply inconvenienced heap. She was not dead. Her kind did not die easily, but she was down and stunned, and, Henry noted with satisfaction, extremely poorly styled now, which for Victoria was arguably worse. The hall was silent. The core fragment in the wall crumbled to ash in his fingers. Spent. Nova stood in the center of the broken floor, breathing hard she didn't need to. staring at him across the wreckage. "You," she said, "electrocuted a challenge to the old law with a piece of garbage." "I prefer improvised a tactical solution using available resources," Henry said. "But yes, garbage. Absolutely garbage. Best garbage of my life." The court did not move against them. Something had shifted. A queen who shielded her food. A fool who defeated the strongest of them with a rock and a bad attitude. The old order had cracked right down the middle, same as the floor, and everyone in the hall could feel the draft coming through. But victory had a bill attached, and it came due fast. The circuit he'd blown to save them had drawn its power from somewhere, and Henry realized, with a sinking certainty, exactly where. The city's ancient reservoir was one system, and the only thing on this planet compatible enough to help him refill Gus's core, the only power source he could ever have used to finish his repairs and fly home, was the same reservoir he'd just spent saving both their lives. He could leave, or he could have saved them. He could not, it turned out, do both. Nova watched the understanding cross his face, and her ancient eyes softened, and for once neither of them reached for a joke. It turned out Henry had been wrong about the reservoir, which was becoming his favorite way to be wrong. He'd spent a full day mourning Gus, sitting in the crater delivering a heartfelt eulogy to a ship that was, once again, technically not dead, when Nova appeared at the crater's lip and informed him that the city had 7 reservoirs, not one, and that he had drained the smallest, oldest, and least beloved of them. The equivalent, she said, of him having heroically sacrificed a spare closet. "You let me grieve for a whole day," Henry said, betrayed. "You were enjoying it," Nova said. "You did a voice for the ship. You cried at your own metaphor. That metaphor was beautiful, and you know it. So Gus could fly." That was the thing they had both been circling for weeks, and now it sat between them in the glowing loam, small and warm and finally, genuinely fixable. The city would refill its little closet reservoir in a decade or 2. Patient people, patient current, and Henry could go home. He stood beside his ship on a world no chart would ever name, under 2 moons, and understood that he was not going to. "I've been thinking," he said. "A dangerous first," said Nova. "You'll outlive me." He said it plainly because it deserved to be said plainly once, without a joke to hide behind. "By centuries. You'll watch me get old and slow and even more insufferable, and one day you'll hear my heartbeat from across the valley, and then one day you won't. That's the deal. That's the whole terrible deal, and you should get to decide it with your eyes open." Nova was quiet for a long moment. The night bird that was not a bird made its struck-wire sound. When she spoke, her voice had lost its careful ice. "I have spent 100 years learning to want nothing, so that I would never lose anything," she said. "It is a very safe way to be dead while remaining, technically, alive. And then a man fell into my forest and complained about the lighting, and I remembered that a thing worth losing is the only thing worth having." She looked at him, gold eyes steady. "I would rather have you for 1 mortal lifetime than eternity in an empty city being sensible. I filed a complaint against sensible. You were right about it. Overrated." Behind them, the pale city had begun, slowly, to change. Victoria had left, sullen, singed, muttering about the old law, taking her faction to sulk on a distant terrace, which Nova permitted with the serenity of a queen who no longer needed to win every argument, only the important one. The others had begun cautiously to be curious again. Henry had taught 3 of them about cheese puffs. It had not gone well. It had gone, he felt, historically. "So I'll stay," Henry said, "and Gus stays parked. And when your people want to know why their queen keeps a warm, breakable, deeply average human around, you can tell them it's because he fixed the lighting." "I will tell them it is because he is a fool," Nova said, "and I have developed a tolerance for exactly one." She stepped closer, the way she had that first night in the Black Forest, close enough that the cold came off her in a slow tide, and this time he didn't flinch from it, only leaned in, warm and mortal and unafraid. "You should be afraid," she murmured, an old joke now, worn smooth between them. Henry laughed. "Got over that around chapter 2. He reached up and touched the strange, elegant point of her ear, the thing that had gone through him the very first night and never quite left. "You're stuck with me. Bad news for an immortal. I'm high maintenance and I narrate my repairs." "I have heard," Nova said. "The whole valley has heard." And under the two moons, one pale and one scarred, beside a ship that would never fly, and a man who no longer wanted it to, the queen who had learned to want something bent down and kissed the fool who had taught her how. And neither of them, not once, looked back at the cold and distant stars he had come from. And so Henry, who fell out of the sky by accident, found the one thing no chart could have led him to, not a way home, but a reason to stay. He came to that pale world counting his losses, and left them behind him in a crater, and chose a short, warm life over a long, cold safety. He chose the thing worth losing, because it was the only thing worth having. Maybe that's the strange arithmetic underneath all of it. We spend so much of our lives learning to want nothing, so that nothing can ever be taken from us. We call it being sensible. We call it protecting ourselves. And all the while the closet stays locked, the lighting stays broken, and the heartbeat we were most afraid to love goes quietly unheard across the valley. So let me leave you with this, wherever you are as you listen. What have you refused to want, because you were afraid of one day losing it? Who is the fool who fell into your forest, the person, the dream, the chance, that you talked yourself out of, because eternity felt safer than a single mortal, breakable, wonderful lifetime of yes? And if a queen who had been careful for 100 years could file a complaint against sensible and step in front of the thing she loved instead of behind it, what, exactly, are the rest of us waiting for? The end. We've reached the end of another story, friends. Don't forget to hit the like button, leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. Until the next sci-fi traveler story, take care.